Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden, and we're also going to stick to my home county of Skåne here in the very south of the country. Now we're returning to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before, and I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years. Quite a few different styles, and the beer that we're going to have a look at today is one of their latest releases through Systembolaget here in Sweden, and it's a style that I know they can do pretty well, but it's also one that I haven't had from them in quite some time actually, so I'm curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head a little bit to the northeast of me here in Lund to Eslöv, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri. So this particular beer is called Thunder Express. It comes in at 8.7% ABV, and this one is simply listed as a double IPA. Now, I'm not sure exactly whether this one is going to be a New England or what, but it does say on the back that it contains havre, which is oats. So yeah, normally a New England IPA would contain barley malt, wheat malt and oat malt. But yeah, this one is just barley and oats, so we just need to see how we get on with it. But this beer was released as part of the Lokal och Småskaligt assortment through Systembolaget for October of 2022. So this is the first of the October beers you'll be seeing. But yeah, let's crack on and see how we get on with it then. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri before, and we will no doubt add more to that in the near future. There's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is hugely appreciated, and if you want to see more reviews, you know, there are lots there. You can check out the playlist of beers from different countries, and you'll find this one in the Swedish playlist. But yeah, let's crack on then and have a little chat about Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri. So Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri, or the Remmarlöv Farm Brewery as it would be in English, are based on a little farm outside of Eslöv, which is to the kind of northeast-ish of Lund. So they've been brewing here since the autumn of 2014, and then in January of 2015 they started selling their beers in Systembolaget, the Swedish alcohol monopoly, we could call it. But the owner and founder of this company is Håkan Nilsson, and together with his wife Michelle, he started his plan for a brewery a couple of years prior to this, and the brewery is located on his family farm, and Håkan is actually the fifth generation of his family to farm the countryside here in Skåne. But the old barn at the farm was renovated and a brewhouse of 1,500 litres was installed, and Hampus Olofsson, formerly of Malmö Brewing Company, was hired as the brewer in August of 2014, and I believe he is still there. But over the last few years, these guys have been gradually building up their capacity. They now have a 3,000 litre brew kit, and they invested in some new fermentation tanks in spring of 2018, which apparently takes their brewing capacity up to a possible 800,000 litres of beer per year. In 2019, they opened up their summer pub, which is going to continue every year. I believe they have just closed it for 2022, but we will be seeing that next year in 2023. That is something I do need to go and visit. But yeah, they were actually planning to expand further over the course of 2020, but then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And from what I understand, if I am remembering the article that I read correctly, the brewery actually was helping out. They were still able to sell a lot of their beer, so the brewery was actually kind of helping out the other parts of the farm business that weren't doing so well during the pandemic. So yeah, the Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri saved the whole farm in a sense, if you like. Do feel free to correct me on that in the comment section below if I've said it the wrong way around. But yeah, as of October 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 100 different kinds of beer. And yeah, they are, I would say probably their most well-known beer is the Sconce Pilsner, which I really enjoy. That was reviewed on the channel the first time it came out. We have had it in the pub at Bishop's Arms in Gustav Adolfs Torg, and I love that beer. Probably my favourite one from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri, but they do some really nice stuff actually. They are very solid when it comes to lagers, and their IPAs have been steadily building up over the years as well. But yeah, solid brewery, and it's always nice to review things from your local brewery as well. But like I said, as of October 2022, 100 different beers from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri. So this is everything we need to say about them for the moment. If you want to learn more, you can check the brewery website, you can follow them on social media to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. If you're interested in the beers, you can have a little look at the website, of course. You can look at the Untappd page, or you can look at some of my older reviews, and we've got reviews from these guys going back to about 2015 or 2016, if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, let's get on and have a look at the beer itself. So as you can see, this one is a little 330 milliliter can. It does look pretty nice, I have to say, kind of standard type of artwork that you'll get from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri. There you can see the Remmarlöv symbol, and you also get this symbol on the can as well, the made in Skåne with the hen on it. And you can see this one contains Strata, Azacca and Idaho 7, so all hops that we know quite well. All three are American, and they're all in the 14% alpha acid range, if memory serves me correctly. Strata is going to give you this lovely, really bright pink grapefruit. Azacca is going to give you a kind of big, bright tangerine note, but with also, or mandarin maybe, really bright orange anyway, with a little bit of pineapple, whereas Idaho 7 is going to give you all the kind of softer tropical fruits like, you know, papayas and apricots and pineapple and all of these kind of things. So quite an interesting hop mix. As we said earlier, this one is 8.7% ABV, so that's maybe one of the strongest IPAs I've had from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri. But yeah, Thunder Express, double IPA this one, and as we said earlier, it does only contain oat and barley malt, no wheat in this one. But yeah, it cost me about 40 Swedish kroner, I believe. That's about €4, maybe about £3.50, maybe about £3.75 actually sterling, and somewhere in the region of $4.25, $4.50 American. But yeah, gold can. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. I'm curious to see what it's going to have in store for us. So yeah, let's do this. This looks nice, actually. It looks a bit more like a West Coast IPA. So, we'll figure out what it is when we actually taste and smell the thing. So, anyway, as you can see, this beer is poured with a lovely, I would say, 3/4 finger of a frothy, very slightly cream coloured head. It's not a perfect white, but you can see the colour of this beer is quite interesting. I mean, this one's it's a very light sort of amber colour. It looks a little bit darker to you on the camera than it does to the naked eye. And if I shine the natural light through it, yeah, it is more of a kind of very rich yellow, very light amber colour. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But yeah, this beer does look pretty nice, and it is pretty damn clear, as you say. You can see if I put my fingers behind the glass, it just has a little tiny touch of that naturally hazy thing to it, but I'm pretty sure this one has been filtered, and just, yeah, steady stream of carbonation going up toward the bottom of that head there. But I mean, overall, it does look pretty nice actually. In terms of appearance, it does certainly look more like a kind of West Coast IPA. And yeah, the West Coast IPAs too tend to be a little bit clearer than their New England counterparts, mainly because they contain pretty much all barley malt. But yeah, it's not unheard of to put a little touch of wheat or a little touch of oat in the West Coast IPA. I think Ballast Point, actually, with the Sculpin, put a little bit of oat or wheat in it. I forget which one. So yeah, there are examples of that. But yeah, it certainly looks more like a West Coast IPA, this one. But I noticed they just called it a double IPA rather than a West Coaster. We'll see what we get out of it. But remember, the colour of your beer is down to the different types of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Length of wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you'll get a darker colour of beer. But yeah, the fruits, or any fruits you put in or whatever, or any barrel aging that you do will affect that too. But when it comes to IPAs, you don't often have to care about that these days. But yeah, let's take a wee look at the aroma and see what we get from this one then. This should be quite nice. Oh yeah, I'm going to say straight away, this smells a little bit more like a West Coast IPA, but with the more kind of New England level bitterness. So my bet is that the malt base in this is more kind of West Coasty leaning. But yeah, the green component on this one kind of tells you that it's potentially a more modern take on the West Coast IPA. So we'll see how we get on with these. Some of these beers can be really good, but as I've always said in reviews, I miss the big, 80 IBUs that the West Coast IPAs always used to give you. I do miss that kind of big hit that they would have. But yeah, aroma wise, this is pretty nice. So first impression is kind of light grassy green component, nice little bit of malty bready character, and then you've also got that little bit of you've also got just a nice bit of oily fruity character to it as well. So yeah, this should be interesting, but let's break it down that wee bit more and describe it properly in depth for you. Yeah, so backbone of the beer, there's a little bit of a kind of fresh white bready bread crust in there. Absolutely, yeah, a bit of fresh white bready bread crust. On top of that, you get a little touch of like an almost wholemealy brown bread, but not all that much. And then definitely kind of elements of white bread in this one. I'd be curious to know what the malt base in this beer actually is, like what barley malts they've used. But yeah, because it does smell a bit familiar, maybe a bit of crystal or something like that. But yeah, a little bit of fresh white bread crust, wee touch of wholemeal bread, good little bit of white bready character as well. And you can smell a little bit of that oaty smoothness in there, which is interesting. It's always interesting to see oats with a little bit of a sweeter malt base to them. So yeah, definitely getting some of that in here. Yeah, nice kind of oaty smoothness, and definitely a wee touch of brown sugar. There is a little bit of a straight up caramel in this one, but I'm also getting some McVitie's digestive biscuity characters out of it too. So yeah, there's some really interesting things with this beer, but the malt base is definitely more kind of West Coasty for sure. It does have a little bit of that West Coasty sweetness to it. So yeah, hoppy side of things then. Yeah, the hoppy side of this beer I think is quite the hoppy side of this beer is quite nice. It's got a little bit of the green component has a little touch of earthiness to it. If I remember rightly, Azaka can just give you a little tiny hint of that. But yeah, you can tell from this one. I think this is mainly relying on late addition and dry hopping. Now with West Coast, well with IPAs in general, there's 3 different kinds of hopping: early, late, and dry hopping. So early addition is usually within the first hour of the wort boil. And that gives you, much of your bitterness. That's where most of the IBU comes from. Late addition hopping's in the last half hour of the wort boil, and that gives you a little touch of bitterness, but mainly flavour and aroma. Dry hopping is after the wort boil, and that's all about flavour and aroma, absolutely. But just usually you get a more deep green component if you've got a lot of early addition hopping, and that is common in West Coast IPAs that they use all 3. New England's tend to use just the latter 2, but the more modern West Coast IPAs are mainly using late addition and dry hopping. But yeah, there's a bit of earthiness in there. There's a bit of you do get a little touch of floral character, but for me the green component really leans toward a more fresh grassy sort of thing, and the lack of the depth to the green component is telling me, yeah, it's late addition and dry hopping. But if you take quite a significant whiff of the beer, if we can call it that, if you take a significant whiff of the beer, you do get a nice little bit of a big florally note to it, which I certainly enjoy. So on the fruity side of things, I don't think we need to say anything more about the green component. The fruity side is kind of what you'd expect. You've got a little bit, I would say that this is interesting as well, because I've not really had Strata so much in a West Coast type malt base. And as I always say, hops behave differently with different yeasts and different malts. There is a little bit of that bright grapefruit in there, that bright pink grapefruit. But you have got, mainly, it's actually quite an oily mango coming out of this beer for me. And that's going to be the Azaka that's giving you that. And the Idaho, maybe not the Azaka, no, not the Azaka actually, it's more the Idaho 7, telling you lies. The Idaho 7 is going to be the one that will give you that. But you can smell like a softer apricot and a little touch of pineapple in there. So yeah, a little touch of pineapple, a little touch of apricot for sure. And there is a little touch of that bright orange at the very front of the nose from the Azaka. So I think for me the Idaho 7 is the hop that's kind of the most noticeable, the most visible in the aroma. Whereas the Strata and the Azaka are taking a bit of a back seat, to be honest with you. So yeah, mainly juicy mango, apricot, a little bit of pineapple. As I say, you've got little hints of this bright grapefruit from the Strata, and the kind of and just that like a little bit of a brighter orange from the Azaka as well. Interesting aroma for sure. I'm curious to see how this is going to turn out in the actual taste. But as I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy that aroma before you get stuck in. But we're going to try this one now. So yeah, Thunder Express, 8.7%, double IPA. I think maybe my strongest IPA that I've had so far from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri in Eslöv here in Skåne. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. Yeah. Yeah, this is more, it is really kind of a big malty IPA, this one actually. Takes the green component a wee bit of white time to come out. But yeah, I think this is kind of what I was saying before. I think it is a West Coast IPA, definitely more of a West Coasty leaning IPA, this one, but late addition and dry hopping. It is exactly as I expected it was going to be from the aroma, and it's nice. It is nice and enjoyable. But as I say, I do miss the bitterness that these beers had. They've actually got a really, and I find this with Remmarlöv, when it comes to their malt bases, when they put a little bit of sweetness in them, the bit of biscuitiness and carameliness, especially with the Sconce Pilsner, it's, you know, the way that they get the malt base in that is lovely. I wish they would put a bit of the bitterness that the Pilsner has into this beer, because that would just, you know, having a little bit, the scones hops that they use in that just have this really nice bit of floral spiciness to them, and I think putting that in this beer would just take it to the next level and really define it as a West Coast IPA. But as it stands, it is a nice beer, but you know, when I have a more caramelly malt base like this, I just want that little bit of bitterness out of it. But yeah, it's enjoyable, this though, don't get me wrong on that. That's me kind of nitpicking with it, but it's definitely a West Coast IPA. You guys know, watching the channel, I do miss the bitterness that these beers used to have back in the day. So yeah, I think we can define this one as a sort of low bitterness West Coast IPA. I can understand why breweries do this, because you know, a lot of drinkers these days have got into IPAs on the New Englands and the low bitterness that they have. But yeah, West Coast IPA I think should just have a bit more bitterness to it. But as I say, still a nice beer, this one. Let's break it down and describe it for you properly. Middle third of the palate first. So, yeah, middle third of the palate. Backbone of the beer, you've got a little bit of that kind of fresh, you have a little bit of that kind of fresh, white bready bread crust there, and it actually gets a little bit drier and more grainy the further you go into the aftertaste. There's a teeny little bit, on top of that bread crust, there's a teeny sort of layer of a kind of wholemeal, brown bready character. But that's very minimal. It is very minimal. This beer really leans toward above that. You can definitely get a slightly more dense and big white bready character to this beer. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a wee bit more of a kind of white bready character to this one. And as I say, that works quite nicely. You do get a little bit more toward the front of that middle third of the palate. I get just a little touch of a kind of woodiness out of this beer, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, a little touch of that in there, but it's good. As I say, it is good. Yeah, a little slight touch of woodiness, but then yeah, on top of this one's interesting in a sense, because on top of the white bread, you can just feel a little bit of a smoother layer, and that's the oats. You get that nice kind of smooth oaty character out of this one, and that for me is quite interesting, because you know, back in the day when I was trying all the West Coast IPAs for the first time, you wouldn't notice oats in the same way that you would now, and that, you know, your palate is constantly changing because of the beers that different breweries are making. Like, you know, when I first tried New England IPAs, they were big and thick, and now you need to go to the triple and the quadruple for me to find them thick. This is just the sort of thing that happens. But when you come back and try something like this that has a little bit of oats on a West Coast malt base, you really can just notice bit of smoothness. So it's almost as you go down the middle line of your tongue, you can, on top of the white bready layer, you can just feel that dense but smooth and almost very slightly sweet oaty character there. So yeah, you've got the layer of white bread, then just a sort of oaty line down the middle of your tongue, which I do like. Yeah, so on top of the oaty layer, you've got that big, on top of that oaty layer, you've got a nice big sweet caramelly note to it, which I think is great actually. So yeah, in the dead centre of your palate, you get a little bit of that kind of concentrated sweet caramel, and that of course is the alcohol flavour coming out of the beer. So yeah, a bit of a concentrated kind of alcohol in there. But yeah, big oily sweet caramel, and as you move further out from that, there's a little bit of a more as you move further out from that, there's a little bit of a more kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity character to it as well, which I quite like. Yeah, malt base, yeah, classic West Coast IPA malt base, this one, absolutely. So we'll move to the back third of the palate then, the border region between middle third and back third of your palate. Again, you get a little bit of bready build up in there, it is a wee bit more of a brown bready note. The bread crust forming the base of the back third of the palate is definitely a little bit more, it is definitely a little bit more sort of grainy and things. Then on top of that, you've got on top of that, yeah, you get a little bit more, you actually do get a little bit more brown bread on the back third of the palate, which is interesting. You can feel that layer in there, and the white bready layer is a bit taller, but above all of that, you get some of the yeasty notes, and for me, it's just like a more kind of slightly airy, very slightly wholemeal bready character there. But yeah, the back third of the palate, the flavour is definitely taller, than it condenses down. It does kind of squash together a little bit more the further that you go into the further forward that you go with this one. But yeah, let's focus on the hoppy side of things then. So yeah, hoppy side of this beer for me, I would say the green component, it has a little bit more bitterness to it. The more that you drink of this beer, it does actually get a little bit more bitter. So maybe my kind of criticisms of the IBU were a little bit, you know, a little bit too harsh in a sense, because you do get a bit more hoppiness out of this beer the further into it that you go. But yeah, in the back corners of the palate, there is a wee touch of earthiness there, but then yeah, as you come further forward, you get a little bit more of a kind of floral aromatic sort of thing out of this beer, and you can feel, yeah, a little bit of that. You do get a little bit of a kind of floral spicy note toward the front kind of corners of the palate there. But round the front curve of the tongue, there's a little bit of grassiness in there. And yeah, it has got, yeah, it just has a nice little bit of brightness to it as well, which I think is great. So there's that little bit of floral character in there, nice little bit of a kind of brightness, and yeah, the way that that goes together is really, really nice. So yeah, it's the green component actually does build in this one. I think I have to say, you know, fair play to them for that, getting a bit of green component in there. So yeah, maybe my criticisms were a little bit early, but still, as I say, I want 80 IBUs out of these beers, especially when it's a big boozy one like this. So yeah, front third of your palate then on the fruity side of things. So the border region between front third and middle third of the palate, there's a little bit of brown bready build up, and then you can feel the base of the beer. Yeah, the base of the beer is definitely a little bit more, the base of the beer has a little bit more of a kind of white bready note to it, but then yeah, you get a little touch of the oak creeping through there as well, and on top of that there's that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So at the back of that front third of your palate, you do get you can feel a bit of the bright pink grapefruit from the strata, absolutely. You do get that there, and that actually spreads forward a wee bit more. But then you can feel the Idaho 7's interesting for me, because I'm used to that giving you these really soft and juicy fruity notes in the New Englands, but you can feel that in the West Coast type malt base, it's actually a lot more oily. And so yeah, you do get a little bit more of a kind of oily mango out of this one, but yeah, definitely you're still getting some of the dry apricot-y notes and a bit more of an oily pineapple as well. But the Azacca is also going to give you a little bit of the pineapple, and as you just reach the front tip of the tongue, you're getting more of that kind of orangey note from the Azacca as well, which again I can appreciate. I think that's really interesting how that all goes together. It's because all three of these hops I haven't had that often in a more West Coast, with a more West Coast type malt base. So in a sense, this beer's been a nice learning experience to see how these three hops behave. But yeah, as I say, this one, it is more like a kind of modern take on the West Coast IPA, like a low bitterness West Coast IPA. So yeah, I like this. I do like it. As I say, it's enjoyable, but I would want a little bit more bitterness from it. If you're going to go for the low bitterness with these, this one isn't even, I think this is maybe isn't even 30 IBUs. You know, if you're going to go for a West Coast IPA, I think minimum you need to give it at least like 50, 60 IBUs, something like that, especially when it's a bit more boozy like this. But as I say, it's an enjoyable beer, this one. I like the flavour profile, but just a bit more bitterness, I think, would suit it, would take it to the next level, actually. Yeah. So I think we can round off with the mouthfeel then. So, mouthfeel wise, this beer is, for me, it is actually kind of right in the middle of the spectrum. It's mid-bodied, smooth carbonation. It does have a wee bit of an oily thickness to it, but it's nice and clean as well. IBU wise, like I said, I think this is quite low. I think this is 25 or 30 IBUs, but it does build up a little bit the further into the aftertaste you go, and you start to get more floral and grassy character out of this one, and the grassiness does build a wee bit of zestiness the more you drink the beer too. The malt base has a wee bit of graininess underneath. You've got a lovely little bit of smoothness as well. Yeah, you've got a little bit of smoothness there on the malt base and quite a bit of kind of sweetness, as I said. 30-ish IBUs and then a nice big oily fruity character too. So yeah, it's a nice enough beer. As I say, it's enjoyable. Just a little bit more bitterness would have taken it to the next level for me. So yeah, nice to try my first IPA from Remmarlöv in what feels like a good while, actually. So I think we can leave it at that for this one. So yeah, this one was the Thunder Express, an 8.7% double IPA. Definitely more like a low bitterness West Coast IPA, in my opinion, but this one comes to you from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri in Eslöv here in Skåne. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Remmarlöv Gårdsbryggeri as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the near future. Till the next time, Slange, Skål, cheers, see you very soon.